The showroom was silent, like a church made of glass and polished metal. White marble floors reflected everything with surgical precision. Floor-to-ceiling windows poured in filtered light that made the luxury vehicles glow, more sculpture than machine. Every surface gleamed. Every car had presence. And every person inside moved like they belonged there or were paid to. Then, the door opened and he stepped in quietly. No fanfare. No entourage, just a man, wearing a plain navy blue t-shirt, dark jeans, and worn sneakers. His baseball cap was pulled low, shadows cast across his face. But it wasn't meant to hide, just to pass through unnoticed. That he walked with calm purpose, but the woman at reception barely glanced up. Her eyes moved from his shoes to his shirt, then to the door behind him, maybe expecting someone more appropriate to follow. "Can I help you?" she asked, already preparing the polite redirect. "Yes," he said with a nod. "I'm here to look." She tilted her head slightly. "At the vehicles?" Before he could answer, another voice cut in, "I got this." A tall, sharply dressed salesman strode over from behind a glass display counter. Mid-30s. Slick hair. Watch too shiny. The kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Sir," he said with a thin smirk, "this is a premium appointment-only showroom. We usually don't handle browsing." Barack Obama glanced at the man, then at the cars. "I'm not in a rush," he replied. "Well," the salesman said, walking a slow half-circle around him, "we usually like to know who we're helping before opening the hoods, you understand. Lotta dreamers walk in hoping for a selfie with a car they'll never drive." Someone from across the room chuckled softly. Barack's expression didn't change. "Is that how you greet most of your customers?" The man smiled wider, now clearly enjoying himself. "Only the ones who don't look like customers." Silence. The words landed, heavy and deliberate. Obama turned his head slowly, looked the man in the eyes, then said, "I'd like to see what you have in all-electric models. Something with extended range. Something serious." The salesman waved toward the far end of the floor. "Sure, we've got a few models in the back. But I'll be honest, nothing you'd probably consider affordable." He chuckled, clearly expecting another laugh. "You know, might be better to check out something more, let's say, accessible." Barack didn't move. "Lead the way," he said simply. The salesman shrugged and turned, walking toward the far display with a swagger in his step. Obama followed. They stopped in front of the most expensive car in the showroom, a limited production electric supercar with carbon fiber accents and a six-figure price tag before customization. The salesman gestured like he was introducing a monument. "This beauty isn't really meant for test drives, if you get my drift." Barack took a long look at the car, then turned his eyes back to the salesman. "I'll take it." The smirk disappeared. "Excuse me?" "I said," Barack repeated, "I'll take it." He removed his cap. The man froze. The receptionist, now standing, dropped her pen. Someone at the service desk gasped audibly. Barack pulled out a small folded document from his back pocket, a certified proof of funds. "Clean. Immediate, no need for financing," he said quietly. "Just one thing, when you bring the keys out, try greeting the next person who walks in like they belong. Might save you the embarrassment." The silence after his words was brief, but it wasn't surrender. It was denial. The salesman's brows furrowed. His voice dropped half a pitch, not out of respect but out of disbelief trying to hold itself together. "You'll take it," he repeated, arms crossing. Barack nodded once. "Calm. Direct." "Yes." The salesman scoffed a short, forced laugh that tried to dismiss the tension. "Sure you will. Do you even know what this car costs?" Barack didn't answer. "Sir," the salesman said, stepping forward now, a trace of anger rising beneath his polished tone. "Look, I don't know what game you're playing, but this isn't the kind of place where people walk in off the street and pretend to be." He stopped short, mid-sentence. But the implication was already out. Barack looked at him fully now. "You think I'm pretending?" he asked, with quiet disbelief. The salesman nodded slowly, eyes narrowing. "Let me guess, you watched a few interviews, learned the voice, throw on a cap, walk into a luxury dealership hoping someone panics and hands you a test drive. He turned to the staff across the room. Guys, come on. You see this? Is no one going to step in here? But the others didn't move. One of the younger associates was staring now not at Barack's face, but at the small scar near his right temple, the exact one she'd seen 100 times in magazine covers, documentaries, presidential debates, and still, the salesman wouldn't stop. You expect me to believe that Barack Obama, former president of the United States, just walked in here, alone, in sneakers and a $10 shirt, to buy a supercar from me? Barack was quiet for a long moment, then he calmly reached into his back pocket, pulled out his ID, official, valid, undeniable, and held it up without a word. The salesman stared, first at the card, then at the face, then back to the card, and still, the denial clung to his pride like armor. This could be fake, he muttered, voice cracking now with something closer to panic. Barack lowered the ID. I don't have to prove anything to you, he said evenly. You asked no questions. You made a judgment. And now, you're scared to be wrong. The manager arrived, finally, walking briskly from the far office, breathless, with too much urgency to hide the fact he had been watching the whole time. What's going on here? He asked, eyeing the tension. The salesman immediately spoke, pointing at Barack. This man is impersonating. He's not impersonating anyone, said the younger associate suddenly, stepping forward. Everyone turned. I recognize him, she said. Her voice shook a little, but she didn't look away. That is Barack Obama. The manager blinked. His eyes darted to Barack's face, then to the ID in his hand. Then, he paled. Mr. Obama, he said quickly. Please forgive this confusion. But Barack shook his head. You all still think the issue is my name, he said. It's not. It's what you thought of me before you knew it. The salesman was silent now, frozen, hands clenched at his sides, his face a blend of disbelief and something deeper, shame. But Barack wasn't done. You're not wrong for not recognizing me, he said. You're wrong for believing that someone who doesn't look wealthy couldn't belong here. People around the showroom were listening now, not pretending, really listening. Someone near the front began to record. The staff stood motionless. A client near the door lowered his coffee and stared. Barack turned back to the car. I'll still take it, he said quietly. But I'm not buying it because I want to. I'm buying it so I never forget how easy it is for people to decide who's worth serving before they ever speak. And then he walked away, left the salesman standing in his own disbelief. Left the manager scrambling to recover. Left behind a showroom no longer filled with quiet luxury but a silence much heavier, a silence that said, you just told the wrong man he didn't belong. Barack Obama stepped outside. The air was brighter than it had been when he walked in, though nothing in the sky had changed. He didn't slam the door. Didn't speak to the cameras. Didn't call anyone, but the moment followed him. Behind the glass, the salesman hadn't moved. His arms hung limp at his sides, his mouth slightly open as though trying to find a sentence that could repair what had just happened, but nothing came. Inside the showroom, a quiet unease grew heavier with every second. The young associate who had spoken up stood awkwardly by the side of the desk, eyes low, knowing the manager's glare would land on her next. The receptionist tapped at the keyboard but didn't type anything. A customer near the corner, the one who had just finalized financing on a luxury hybrid, stepped away from her paperwork. I don't think I want this anymore, she said flatly. The manager spun. Excuse me? I came in because I thought I respected this brand, she continued. But if this is how your staff treats people who don't look like they walked out of a yacht club, I'm not putting my money here. She dropped her pen on the counter, then turned and walked straight out the door. The sound of her heels on the marble echoed. Then a second client rose. A man in a tailored blazer and pocket square, who'd said nothing the entire time. He looked the manager in the eye and said quietly, you embarrassed yourselves today. Not because you made a mistake. But because when the truth stood in front of you, you doubled down on being wrong. Then he walked. A ripple formed. Inside the showroom, the energy changed fast. One of the junior staffers stepped away from the display car he'd been polishing and took off his name badge. He didn't speak. Just placed it on the desk and left through the side exit. The salesman was still frozen. The manager was spinning that. He picked up the office phone and dialed corporate. His voice was high-pitched now, tense, rehearsed. No press has called yet, but there were people filming. We're working on it. But outside, the press wasn't needed. A woman near the parking lot who had been watching from her car posted a video with a caption that read, "I just watched Barack Obama get humiliated by a car salesman, and handle it with more class than anyone I've ever seen." The clip was short. It didn't show the entire confrontation, just the moment Barack handed over his ID, and the salesman visibly recoiled. Within 10 minutes, it had 50,000 views. By the end of the hour, news outlets were calling the dealership for comment. Inside, the manager was trying to reason with the remaining clients. "This isn't reflective of our values," he said, but no one believed him because they'd seen the values unfold in real time. And outside, Barack was still standing near the curb, watching as an older man parked a used Toyota 2 spaces down. The man, maybe in his late 60s, stepped out and did a double take, then, slowly, walked toward him. "Sir," he said, softly. "I don't want a photo. I watched what they did to you through the window. And I wanted to say, thank you. For not giving them what they deserved. And for showing us what we deserve." Barack smiled gently, then reached out to shake the man's hand. "You don't have to raise your voice," he said, "to remind people who you are." Back inside, the manager walked briskly to the front door, just in time to see another customer and then another leave without a word. By the time the sun began to set, 6 sales had been cancelled. Corporate had called back twice, and the salesman, he was sitting behind the desk, his tie loosened, his hands shaking the same hands that had waved Barack Obama toward the exit. Now, he couldn't move them at all. Because he had learned something too late. You never know who you're talking to, and worse, you never know who else is watching when you forget how to treat them. By evening, the city had already turned the story into wildfire, not through headlines, not yet, but through screens, clipped videos, stitched reactions, stitched again and again until the world could feel the heat that had been meant to burn quietly. But Barack wasn't watching. He had left the dealership an hour earlier, declining any private car delivery or fanfare. He asked the showroom assistant, the only one who spoke with any decency, to forward the paperwork through a secure channel. Then he walked 0.3 blocks down. No security. No sunglasses. Just him, the sounds of LA traffic, and a few lingering glances from people still unsure if what they saw online was actually him. He stopped at a quiet corner cafe and sat alone near the window. Ordered a cup of black coffee, and nothing else. No phone on the table. No laptop. Just the same folded receipt in his coat pocket, the one the manager had tried to hand him with a shaken voice and sweaty fingers. The silence was good, but it didn't last. His phone buzzed once in his pocket. He ignored it, then again, and then again. He pulled it out finally, ready to switch it off, but paused when he saw the name on the screen, Avery Trent. Avery wasn't press. Wasn't a donor. Wasn't looking for favors. He was the CEO of one of the country's largest car manufacturing companies and someone who rarely called anyone directly. Barack hesitated, then answered. "Mr. President," Avery said, voice steady, but quiet. "I know you probably don't want to hear from anyone tonight." "I don't," Barack said calmly, "but I'm listening." Avery chuckled. "Then I'll be brief." There was a pause on the line. The sound of someone inhaling before saying something real. "I watched it happen," Avery continued. "Not just the footage. I've watched it happen my whole life. Just not to someone whose face is on the cover of history books." Barack didn't respond. "Here's the thing," Avery said. "My company's hosting a keynote next week. It's about equity in consumer experience. The board wanted influencers. Trend voices. The usual noise." He exhaled. "But I just watched a man walk into a showroom, get publicly humiliated, not raise his voice, and still leave the entire room exposed, not by force, but by example. Another beat. I want you to speak. Not about cars. Not about money. About dignity. About what that moment meant, not just for you, but for every person who's been treated like a visitor in a space they could afford." Barack leaned back in his chair, sipping the coffee. "That's not exactly my platform these days," he said quietly. "I know," Avery said. "Which is why it would mean something. Because you didn't come looking for attention. And that's exactly why everyone's paying attention now." Barack looked out the window. The light had shifted. The city had begun to dim around the edges, and somewhere behind him, people were still sending the video to their group chats with captions like, "Look how calm he stayed. This is how you remind people who you are." They really tried it with him. He finished the coffee. "I'll think about it," Barack said finally. "You don't owe anyone anything," Avery replied. "But people are listening now. And the right voice could remind them how to listen better." They said goodbye. No press release. No media follow-up, just a quiet moment between two men who knew that sometimes, power isn't about how loud you speak but about who leans in when you speak softly. Later that night, Barack sat in his living room. The TV was off. His phone was buzzing again and again, but he didn't look at it. He just held the receipt in his hand. Not because he needed proof of purchase, but because it was the only thing in that entire showroom they handed him without judgment, and that said everything. The invitation came 2 days later, formal, polished, the kind of letterhead used when reputations are trying to fix themselves before anyone calls them out. It came with first-class travel, a suite, press coverage, and a promise of meaningful discussion. The keynote would open the annual Global Auto Equity Summit, a PR-heavy conference sponsored by some of the world's most powerful vehicle manufacturers. Barack Obama didn't respond immediately. He wasn't interested in flashing lights, camera angles, or being the face someone used to clean up a brand. But the voice in his head, the one that had stood still while a man looked him in the eye and laughed, whispered something different. "Now, they're still talking. Maybe it's time you answer." So he said yes, but on one condition: no pre-approved scripts. No handlers. No edits. That he would speak alone. And he would speak once. The room wasn't built for silence. It was a space designed for buzz. LED walls glowing with company logos, glass tables lined with branded water bottles, executives shifting in chairs that cost more than most people's paychecks. The crowd was full: business leaders, designers, marketing executives, a few celebrities who thought being seen here meant being progressive. Most expected a polished speech, some clever one-liners, maybe a story about leadership with a soft ending. Then Barack Obama stepped out. No suit, dark slacks. Open collar shirt. No tie. No crowd of aides, just him, and the silence that followed him in like a second presence. He looked over the room, paused, and then leaned slightly forward on the podium. "I walked into a car dealership last week," he began. "Not as a politician. Not as a speaker. Just as a man." The room stilled. "I wore jeans. A t-shirt. No security. I didn't announce myself. I didn't try to be recognized. I just wanted to see what would happen if I came in like anyone else." He paused. A few in the audience exchanged looks. They had seen the video. Others hadn't, and their interest sharpened. "What happened," he said, "was exactly what happens to millions of people every day. I was dismissed. Laughed at. Assumed to be irrelevant. Not because of what I said, but because of what I wore. Because of how I entered the room." No one moved. He continued, his voice low, steady. "See, we love to talk about equity when it's wrapped in a campaign. We put it in slogans. In training modules. We tell ourselves we're doing better." He looked directly at the front row: corporate sponsors, branding leads, image managers. But then someone walks into your showroom without a tailored suit, and suddenly, they don't fit the brand. Suddenly, they must be lost. Or worse, they're lying. He held their eyes, and the truth is, some of you are more comfortable talking about equity than practicing it. A ripple of discomfort passed through the room. Barack leaned back. "I wasn't hurt by what happened. I've been underestimated before. I've been dismissed by people louder than that salesman. A beat, but the people I kept thinking about afterward weren't me. They were the ones who don't have a platform. Who walk into rooms every day and get told, with a smile, you don't belong here." He stepped away from the podium now. His voice never rose, but it carried. "They're the ones this speech is for. The ones who've learned to speak softly, not out of weakness, but because the world doesn't listen when they shout. The ones who leave stores humiliated and are expected to laugh it off. Who get handed rejection instead of receipts." He glanced toward the executives, "And if that makes you uncomfortable, good. That means you're listening. Silence, complete, then one clap, then another, then a wave of them, but Barack didn't smile. He didn't bow down, he just gave them a single nod, and said, "Thank you for the time." And walked off the stage the same way he'd entered the dealership, quiet. Unapologetic. And fully seen. 2 weeks had passed, the video had racked up millions of views across platforms. Not because it was loud but because it wasn't. In a world obsessed with outrage, what captured people wasn't the insult. It was the stillness, the way Barack Obama never raised his voice, the way he didn't need to. News anchors dissected the footage. Brand analysts speculated on the long-term damage to the dealership's reputation. Social media flooded with commentary, duets, think pieces, but for Barack, the storm had long moved on. He had spoken. He had walked away, but the story wasn't finished, not for him, not yet. On a crisp morning, Barack stepped out of a town car in front of the same dealership. This time, there were no cameras. No press. No social media team trailing behind. Just him, in a gray sweater, dark slacks, and a black coat. Inside the showroom, things looked different, subtly but unmistakably so. There were now small signs on every entrance: "Everyone is welcome. Always." The staff uniforms were updated, more relaxed. A new hire was greeting a middle-aged couple with genuine warmth, offering them water before even asking their names, and behind the front desk, standing stiff and quiet, was the same man, the salesman. He hadn't been fired. Barack had asked for that specifically, not because the man deserved leniency, but because sometimes the bigger lesson isn't removal. It's standing where you failed and learning how to face it every day. The receptionist looked up, eyes widening. She rose halfway from her seat. "Mr. Obama." He nodded once. Calm. Gentle. "I'm here to pick up my car." The atmosphere shifted instantly. The manager appeared within seconds, his posture more measured this time, more real. "Mr. President, of course. Right this way." "No need for the formalities," Barack said. "Just the paperwork. And a conversation." The manager blinked. "Of course. Anything." Barack turned not to him, but to the salesman. The man had frozen when he walked in. Now, slowly, he stepped forward, his voice cracked as he spoke. "Mr. Obama. I'm not here for an apology," Barack interrupted softly, the man's mouth shut. His eyes dropped. Barack continued. "I'm here to tell you something you probably don't expect to hear." The staff watched silently. Everyone did. "I forgive you," Barack said. The salesman's breath caught. His shoulders slumped, almost involuntarily, but that doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't excuse what you assumed. What you said. He paused, "But it can be the reason you change how you see people. Not because you got caught, but because you now understand what it means to treat someone like they don't belong and have them stay anyway." The salesman nodded, slowly. Not out of relief, but out of shame that had nowhere left to hide. "I do understand," he whispered. Barack stepped closer. "Then start there," he said. "Start by making sure no one else has to go through what I did just to be seen." And then he extended his hand. The man didn't move at first. Then, almost with disbelief, he took it, not with a grip of triumph, but with the trembling hold of someone who had just been given a second chance they knew they hadn't earned. Barack walked outside moments later. The car was waiting, sleek, black, silent, powerful. He opened the door, then paused. A young man in a hoodie was walking by on the sidewalk. He slowed, stared, then stopped. "Sir," he asked, hesitant. I saw the video. I saw what they did to you. And how you didn't lose it. How you just stood there." Barack smiled slightly. "Sometimes the loudest thing you can do is not explode." The young man nodded. Then looked toward the dealership. "Did you come back to shut them down?" Barack shook his head. "No," he said. "I came back so they never forget the lesson." Then he got in the car and drove off slowly, quietly, and fully in control. Inside, the salesman sat down behind the desk, different posture now, same desk, same job, but a different man, because when you're forgiven in public, you don't get to pretend anymore, you get to rebuild. Point one person at a time, and Barack, he didn't make a speech about it. Didn't post about it. Didn't add it to a memoir. Because this was never about being seen again. It was about reminding the world, dignity doesn't need volume. It needs presence, and a reason to come back.